Welcome to Recross the Paths. My name is Cade, and my guest today is J.Mul. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a treat to connect across the world. This is maybe the furthest call I've been part of so far, and what a treat to get to share the airwaves about a shared passion.
Yeah, have you had any other Europeans on so far?
Not yet, but I hope this may be the first of many.
Kind of surprises me. I'm sure there are many, many more interesting Europeans to talk to.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think perhaps the biggest challenge may be the time zone, so crossing many hours, a little different than just trying to link the east or west coast of the US.
That is true.
But I'm always fascinated by something like Cube that connects people globally, that it's not just a passion that you get to engage with, on the computer somewhere or just with your friends around the area, but that you can just type these ideas into the internet and find friends all over the place. So this is really exciting for me in a number of ways. We're going to get to dive into a cube project of yours, but before we do, I always like to ask, why cube, J.Mul? What got you into this pursuit?
So I actually played Cube before I really started playing Magic the Gathering again. I actually used to play a lot of the Pokemon trading card game Cube.
Excellent, yeah.
So I am a pretty big Pokemon fan, and so is my now fiance.
Congratulations, by the way. Very, very exciting.
Thank you. So yeah, we kind of got into the Pokemon TCG, and I wanted to draft it. And the Pokemon TCG isn't normally draftable. The only way to draft it is through a cube. So that's how I got into cubing. And then I kind of got disillusioned with the Pokemon trading card game as a vehicle to cube. And then around the same time, I rediscovered Magic the Gathering, and then I was like, well, why not just Magic the Gathering cube at that point? And that's how I got back into Magic the Gathering.
Like if you're going to cube, you may as well do it with with the next game.
Exactly.
I do have to ask, with the Pokemon cubing, were you doing normal evolution rules or were you usually doing mutant rules?
I've done both.
I've just been fascinated by how many variants there are to try to make Pokemon work as a game that way, because it requires exact cards to play together in some, like it by rules is written.
Yeah, it is different, and some of those differences I was no longer willing to accept, I guess.
So you came from Pokemon into Magic and you hit the ground running with Cube. Were you
Yeah.
mostly playing at that point or were you designing already?
I was designing from the start, basically. Although I guess that's a bit of a depending on whether you count powered vintage cube as really designing.
Shots fired early here.
But yeah, that's how I started. Then very quickly moved on to a simpler project to get my fiance into Magic the Gathering without comboing out on her within the first 2 or 3 turns, and then I tried lower power cube that way and it wasn't for me. So I very quickly went back to a powered vintage cube. And then the only cube that I have really made since then and put any kind of significant time and effort into is the cube that we will be talking about today.
Yeah, and so let's dive in here with that idea. This is the Prismatic Desert. I don't see this name trademarked, but I hear it may have been used elsewhere too.
Yeah, I would like to issue a formal apology to DSB. DSB used this name already. I did come up with it independently, but it did already exist. My apologies, but it is the right name for the cube, so I will not be changing it.
No, that's great. That's great. And shout out to DSB, a good friend of the show as well. So yeah, the Prismatic Desert. Give us the overview for this project. What should players expect when they sit down?
I envisioned this project even before any mechanical restrictions were laid out as a cube where you were overwhelmed by color and bright lights, essentially. It's more of a feeling than a mechanical thing. And then from there, I went into, well, how do I achieve that? How do I achieve the idea of there is so much color that I can't really make any sense of it? And the way that I achieved that was by having every card be multicolor and also every land be multicolor. And also there's no basic lands, so that every land is actually multicolor.
It's gold all the way down.
Yes.
I didn't realize at first that all of the lands also were multicolored. I did a test draft to get a feel for the environment, and it is, as you said, kind of a constellation of colors that you have to engage with all at once.
Yeah. That is the core conceit of the cube.
So what was it like to start with a feeling rather than a mechanical idea? If it's like this is how I want players to I don't know, react maybe. How did you begin with that?
Truthfully, I don't remember exactly. I did know very early on that I had to do something interesting with the lands. I have been kind of annoyed by bad mana bases in cubes before, so I had always been thinking about lands even when I was designing other cubes, like more so than the spells sometimes. So I knew very quickly that I needed to do something there. And then at some point it just kind of clicked that it needed to be all multicolor and it needed to be desert, and that was the way to evoke the feeling mechanically. And then once I had that figured out, I very quickly got like 60, 70, 80% of the way to the conceits of the cube as it is today.
That's pretty exciting. Drafting a desert cube is already kind of a high mental load. And then drafting a full multicolor environment is an additional mental load. You noted kind of overwhelming is part of your goal. Do you think that's kind of a challenge to accessibility, or is that all part of the experience?
Both. So it is absolutely a part of the experience, and because of that, I just don't bring it to any place where there will be people who even have a chance of not wanting to engage with this. So I play it with my fiance and a very good friend of mine and anyone else who I ask, like, hey, is that something you're interested in? But it's not something that I would bring to our local cube now and just say, hey, how about we play this and subject some people that I hardly know to it.
No, J.Mul, that's really cool. I actually like that as, hey, this is, I don't want to say it's like, this isn't for everyone, but this is a particular flavor that some people will really enjoy. And I think there's a strength in knowing that about the design.
Yeah, I think part of that is also just that my local cube group does have those kind of cubes already, cubes that are easier to pick up and focus more on normal magic, I guess. So there's just no need for me to have a cube like that. So I don't need to cater to that.
So you described desert cubes as having kind of a core puzzle. So how do you define that puzzle, and then how do you build this project toward making the most of that?
So the puzzle to me is, how do I make my deck functional, right? I have enough colored sources of all the colors in my deck. To me, that is the puzzle, no matter which desert cube you're playing. The way that I maximize that puzzle here is by, I guess one big thing is taking away the basics. In my experience, many desert cubes and semi-desert cubes hold basics in very high regard, right? Because they are just untapped colored sources, right? They're recontextualizing basics to actually be really, really good,
Yeah.
whereas I'm recontextualizing basics to not exist at all.
Recontextualizing by way of just removing.
Yeah, exactly.
I found that really interesting that with everything being two or more colors, you need at least two lands to cast any particular spell. So it isn't just, oh, I have a blue
Yes.
card, I can take an island and I'm good. It's, hey, this is a blue black spell. That means I need two different lands that both also produce two different colors.
Yeah, that is what makes the puzzle so difficult.
Did you consider breaking Singleton for any of your lands to help facilitate any of that?
I did consider breaking Singleton. The reason I didn't is because of the custom land cycle, rather, the custom finishing of the land cycle
Yeah.
that is in the cube.
You're beating Wizards of the Coast to the punch by, just a very short time now.
Yeah, exactly. I finished the cycling lands, the ones that debuted in, I believe, Amonkhet,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I finished them. I used a different land cycle that they finished, the bad filter lands, the signet filter lands. I used the art for that and just slapped the rules text of the enemy cycling lands on them. But Wizards is catering specifically to me by printing the enemy cycling lands in Commander product this year and early next year.
They finally got your letters, huh?
Something like that. But yeah, if it wasn't for those existing, I was a little bit worried about fetches not being able to fetch enough. Because something you don't usually think about with your fetch lands is that they can fetch basic lands,
Mhm.
of which you have an infinite amount in the basic box. But if you don't have basic lands in the basic land box, then you need to draft every fetchable land for your fetch lands, which is a big recontextualization, but also is the reason that I considered adding extra fetchable lands to be able to use the fetch lands at all.
Yeah, and then I imagine even in a desert, you probably didn't want to have choices that were just so far worse than your type duels.
Yeah, exactly. But I think all of the current cycles are okay enough. I mean, I'm not going to say no if they printed a really good cycle next set, right? I'm not going to say, oh no, it's perfect as is. I'm always looking to upgrade. But there is not currently a cycle where I'm like, this needs to go immediately.
No, that's good. And I know there's always some tension in desert drafts, but you don't want it to be the gap from here's an untapped ABUR duel versus like here's the Dominaria United just tapped version of the same thing.
Oh yeah, no, I have tried to avoid that as much as possible.
Thinking of those completed cycles, you do include a couple of non-traditional cards, I suppose is the best way to say it in this project. Can you speak to some of what you've done with alchemy and some of the other proxy cards?
Listen, listen. Blue-red spells, if you think about it, really, really wants one mana cards.
Sure
It-
does.
and I do not have any one mana cards. So I needed to dig deep into the two mana spells. And at some point, I was just so fed up. Like, at some point, I was running Teleportal. I don't know if you know that card. It's a very, very bad card.
I do not know teleportal offhand.
I also do not know the exact Oracle text, but it's very bad.
Oh, this is from Return to Ravnica. This is yeah, this is an overload card that
Yeah,
grants a creature +1/+0 and unblockable.
yeah, this is a really, really bad card.
Just what your spell slinging deck wants.
Well, in a way, it kind of does, right? If you have a Sprite Dragon or whatever, well, I guess that already has flying. But something that doesn't have flying, something that you've made a little bit bigger, and now it's unblockable, and you can get a bunch of damage through in like a blue-red tempo spells deck. That was the idea. But obviously, the card is just so unbelievably bad that I just couldn't do it anymore. So I had to include an alchemy card, unfortunately.
No, I was just curious. Many people will have either turned that setting off on their Scryfall or they just choose to avoid and ignore those. But I appreciate that you sought it out as a solution to a problem.
Yeah, I still try to avoid them where possible, but I couldn't do it anymore.
In that same spirit, you also noted there were a couple of things that you've chosen to exclude. So things like Universes Beyond or things that reference Commander. Was that a decision for your preference or gameplay, or as we've maybe heard a bit of both?
So I like Magic IP. I like having a space where I can engage with the Magic IP. I don't really strongly dislike Universes Beyond, but I think there is a space where I want it and a space where I don't want it. And this is a space where I really don't want it. And then something kind of similar goes for Commander, where I think Commander has some good aspects to it, but I don't want explicit references to Commander in this cube that is not meant to be a Commander cube. It just happens to be that because of how multicolored cards in recent sets have been, that you could easily play this as a Commander cube.
Mm.
So I have it on the Cube Cobra that absolutely you could play this as a Commander cube, and it probably would function relatively well compared to trying any other cube as a Commander cube. But at the core, it isn't one, and I want to keep the ways in which I engage with Magic kind of separate.
Then does that feel like a limitation for this project, or is that kind of helpful to have that focus in what you're working with?
I haven't really felt it as a limitation. There haven't really been any cards where I was like, I really, really wish that I could have put this in, but I can't because of X or Y restriction.
So you mentioned that this is something you play with generally smaller groups. I know often people design cubes with 8 players in mind, sometimes with expansions to go up from there. What was it like designing for a smaller group to try to build a desert that way?
So, in some ways, it's definitely very different, but I think I approached it from mostly still the same way as I would making a 6 or 8 or even more player cube. Part of that is because you can't actually go down too low on the amount of lands because there are 10 base colors as opposed to 5 base colors, right?
Hmm.
So all of those need to have a requisite number of lands to even function. And so because of that, all of the ratios actually end up being pretty similar to if it had been an 8 player cube. So I actually think the difference is not that big, at least for this project.
And that's interesting. I think you noted in your overview that once you get closer to 8 players, though, those margins on lands are just tiny.
Oh, yeah. I suspect that if you played this with 8 players who didn't all have a very good focus on how many lands and spells they had and had a good ability to read signals and read the table, that at least one of them will train wreck.
Yeah, the perennial fear of any desert cube designer that somebody's going to end up with a deck that just can't play.
Yeah, it happens, but at the end of the day, that is the experience that you sign up for. If you're gonna play with fire, you're gonna get burned sometimes.
I love it. I'm here for it. I'd love to hear you speak a little bit to your inclusion of Lore Seeker. There was something really interesting with this that I hadn't considered until the second or third time I read through it.
Yeah, so I used Lore Seeker in a bit of a different way. I use Lore Seeker as a way to decide who gets an extra pack sometimes because of the way that the maps work out in dividing the amount of cards in the cube over a certain amount of players because I always want to have my packs be 16 cards instead of 15 cards because I like the amount of times that it wheels if you do manage to get 8 people together to draft this. But then if I just did 24 packs of 16, you get to, what is that, 384, I think? I'm not entirely sure. You get to some number that isn't neatly divisible by 10, which is the amount of base colors. And since I really wanted this project to be color balanced, I needed a way to fix that. And so I go to 25 packs of 16, and whoever happens to open the Lore Seeker, that is just where the extra pack gets added. So you don't have to spend a pick on it, it just happens.
Oh, nice. So that takes you from 384 up to 400.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I also appreciate you noted that Lore Seeker gets removed from the pool afterward. And my initial thought was like, well,
Yeah,
why? Because Lore Seeker would be great. And then I realized, oh, well, that's exactly why it has to come out.
yeah. It would be kind of cheating because you can use any mana to cast it, and that's not the rules of engagement here.
That's one of the funniest restrictions, J.Mul. That that's like this is one of those cards that it's here for the gimmick in almost every other cube, and most people don't play it because it's just not good enough. And here you'd be like, ah, oh, yeah, colorless bear. I am so excited for this. One of the other things I wanted to make sure to ask was, why did you choose to avoid land destruction in the desert cube?
Because it isn't fun. Is honestly the answer because I don't find it fun. It's already like the core puzzle to me is getting your mana under you and then having your opponent kick it out from under you is just, I don't know, it just didn't feel like the right environment for that. Even though in my powered vintage cube, I absolutely am a strip mine enjoyer.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as I'm hearing you describe this, it sounds like I know for many a desert environment is supposed to be punishing in different ways. But it sounds like, would it be fair to suggest that the way you're approaching this is that the tension comes from the build rather than the gameplay? Like how you put it together?
I think that's fair, yeah. I still think it is in a sense punishing, just punishing in the way that it is overwhelming, right? Very taxing,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have the same kind of idea of punishing gameplay that you might see in the original Desert Cube or many derivatives of that cube. Once you start the game, you're kind of just playing regular Magic, kind of.
I appreciate the caveat there. It's kind of normal.
Yeah, except that there's no one drop, so aggro looks very different, and also spells looks very different. But other than that, it's mostly creatures and removal spells.
I think this is a fair place to ask broadly about how do you think of power level in an environment like this?
I try not to have cards that are too powerful and hard to interact with in the base color pairs. I try to put that into the three colored slots. That isn't to say that there aren't good cards, and maybe the best cards are in the two color slots, but I do try to make an effort that the power band is relatively high and not very large between the best and the worst cards in the three colored slots, with the idea that either you pack one, pick one of those cards, and you really try to stake your lane because you really want to play that card. Or even if you start with a two-color card, that then you see a three-color card, and you're like, oh wow, that's a big power outlier. I ate some veggies. I got my red-black removal spell and my red-white two-mana aggressive creature. I now get to take the really, really cool assault chicken.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite cards from Dragonstorm.
It's awesome. I love it. Tarkir Dragonstorm in general has been really, really good for this cube.
Oh yeah, any set that champions multicolor stuff, probably a gold mine for you. Pun certainly intended.
Yeah, for sure. One of the tension points that maybe one wouldn't think about when designing these kinds of cubes is Streets of New Capenna was a while ago compared to Tarkir Dragonstorm.
Yeah.
So all of the cards from Takir Dragonstorm are kind of just houses compared to the huts in Streets of New Capenna.
That's so interesting because yeah, but all the time dilation of the past couple years, it certainly feels like it wasn't that far back. But in terms of Magic design, we've had a few dozen sets since then.
Yeah.
I think something that's important as we're thinking about power here, you noted in your overview that there's like not enough density of fixing necessarily for a player to lock in on just two colors without some significant work. Can you talk about that?
Actually, it's not the fixing that's the well, it's also the fixing that's the issue, but it's actually the amount of cards just in each base color. There's only 20 cards in each base color. So that even if you manage to get every single Azorius cards, you only have 20 playables.
Yeah.
So technically, there would also not be enough fixing, but you could get like a dual that's one of your colors, which is then essentially just a basic. So that is technically possible, but there's just no way to play only two colors, even if you got every spell in those colors, unless you want a deck with 20 spells and 20 lands, which I wouldn't recommend.
So then is it like you have to think of each color pair like you would think of it as a single color in another draft?
Yeah, that's kind of my hope.
So with that and with your curve starting at 2, does that naturally lead to maybe grindier or longer games, you think?
It can, but also sometimes you just play a 3 power creature on turn 2 and then just start smashing them.
Rakdos Headliner always comes to mind for me in these kind of environments where, a hasty 3 drop on turn 2 still does what it says on the tin.
Yeah, it will just kill you. I mean, eventually you're just like, yeah, especially if you get one of your like 3 or 4 mana haymakers online before they find a removal spell or before they find a second removal spell, you can just put on so much pressure that the game ends in a couple turns.
Have you experienced your drafters finding their way into 4 and 5 color decks more frequently? Is that a challenge?
It's nigh impossible. I've never seen anyone pull it off so far. It's really, really difficult. And I'm not even entirely sure that it's a good strategy here. I've never seen anyone really try. What I have seen is that people have had to resort to it because they otherwise wouldn't make a functional deck. But almost all the time they were like, I wish I didn't need to do this.
That's so interesting. In other cubes, it's often people think of it as, oh, you're going to push toward the 5 color good stuff deck. It's funny to hear that here it's like, oh no, you don't want to get stuck there.
No, it's so hard because normally in a 5 color good stuff deck, you're gonna wheel premium gold cards and you're gonna wheel premium lands that no one is in that color pair. And then you can fill it out with like a couple high pick lands and a couple basics. That's just not gonna happen here because everyone is in all of your gold cards colors and everyone is in all of your land colors. So you don't really get the power level boost, and then you still get the nerf in your mana base. So in my experience, it hasn't been a very winning strategy.
It sounds like you've designed to kind of curb against that anyway. I think you described this as, not the cube for powerful snowbally threats, I think was how you described it.
Yeah, I don't want singular cards to just be too powerful if they aren't removed for a turn. I don't want really, if it's a gold card that you would like consider pack one, pick 1 to 3 picking in a vintage cube, it's probably not here.
And that's certainly not to say that it's not a powerful environment or that there aren't powerful cards, but just a different type of power.
Oh, no, there certainly are. And honestly, I'm not sure if I wrote the overview today that that would be the exact phrasing that I would use, but I think the point still relatively stands that really like self-perpetuating value engines that are so supremely powerful that they would be powerful in any vacuum, including the most powerful environments there are. I have excluded them. So, your Uros and Phlages and Okos are not welcome here.
In your designs, you've eschewed referring to commander mechanically, but you also have the setup to potentially play this in a multiplayer environment. So it's kind of unusual to see the I don't know the bond lands, the lands that come in untapped if you have multiple opponents. So why do you have those in this environment?
So the real answer is just because I need to have enough lands that are good enough that my players won't get mad at me for having to include in their decks. So even in 1v1 games, I tell people to treat them as though they are untapped but untyped dual lands. And then if it comes to be that we want to play a game of Commander, then sure. And I understand that that's a little bit maybe hypocritical compared to not wanting them on spells, not wanting references to Commander on spells, but I'm willing to make that concession for gameplay reasons because the next best cycle of lands that I would include is I don't even know what it would be, but it would be quite bad.
Like a proper step down from that.
Yeah, it would be a massive, massive step down.
And I think because it doesn't say the word commander or partner or anything like that, it's one that you can actually just look at and go, oh, I do actually have multiple opponents. Or the curator right here has just told me, go ahead and play it that way.
That's true. It doesn't technically say commander on it. I like that reading.
We're all about technical correctness here, J.Mul.
Ah, I have found my place.
Well, J.Mul, one of the ways that we got connected, a little non-traditionally, I suppose, is I got to read your thesis from a recent school project. It's in a field that I'm not terribly familiar with, so I got to learn a lot just by exploring it a little bit, and I thought there were some really interesting overlaps with how we engage with Cube too. Tell me a little bit about this field and then what that thesis speaks to broadly.
So the field is essentially the intersection of artificial intelligence and linguistics. And I'm sure many, many people are now having alarm bells go off in their heads about large language models and other unwanted things. Um, but that is not what it is about at all. It is about modeling, or at least the stuff that I do is about modeling a first language learner, so a child, and modeling their brain as well as possible, and then feeding them input that is as naturalistic as possible, and then hopefully in the way that those models learn language, we can learn something about possibly how a human is able to learn language just from input.
That's really fascinating. You know, as I was reading through, it's not just talking about it from the language side, it's also talking about, you know, a whole lot of the data side and how you like the weights of different ideas. Do you think of this study as more language oriented or more math oriented along the way?
I think what I write about is in large part focused on the maths of it, just because I need to be very, very precise in order to have the study be replicable. But I think if you approach it holistically, that actually it is still a very, if not language related topic, at very least, yeah, a neurolinguistics related topic. So it tells you something possibly about the way that human language is represented neurologically.
Well, and I appreciate that you mentioned the necessity for precision because you certainly went into a whole lot of detail on your methodology and the research that was necessary for the project. Do you have a similar approach to your cube design, or is that like a separation of work and hobby for you?
I never would have thought of it this way, but I think so. Yeah, because when I build cubes, I often have a whole host of other cubes open to look at, to cross-reference, to find ideas from. So in a way, I kind of treat it similarly to the way I would do research for a thesis or another project.
Do you think those are methodologies you would recommend to others, or is that like this is kind of just your personality?
I think it absolutely is good to stand on the shoulders of giants, but also there is some real value in going into truly unexplored territory. And I think finding a jumping off point can be helpful, but it's really not all there is to it. There is a Dutch, relatively famous song in which a line goes, "A good start is half the work, but it's only half."
I like that. That's really good. J.Mul, I was particularly struck by your conclusion of your thesis that basically said that though you set out with all these parameters in hopes of what it would achieve, that it didn't necessarily meet all the goals or that it didn't exactly land where you thought it would. How do you find that to be a valuable result, both here and perhaps in other pursuits?
For that specific thesis, it was a useful result because it showed a theoretical limit to the framework that I was using. So the analysis, this isn't going to be a fruitful endeavor moving forward, is useful there. But I also think I could definitely relate that back to Cube, where I know that sometimes you will go into a project and you will do it and you will learn something. And sometimes that something you learn is, this isn't for me, or this isn't what I wanted. And that can be really just as valuable as having a forever cube.
It's beautiful. That's so good.
Thank you.
You said you wanted to speak some about like meeting your heroes in the cube space or like thinking about what it's like to just be able to connect. I don't know if I have a good natural segue into that, but I'm really fascinated by the thought.
So part of that thought was just me sending a message to you.
Well,
I hold your podcast in high regard. I like listening to it. So the idea that I could send a relatively, at least to me, high profile figure a message about something so personal to me, I think that speaks volumes about how tight knit of a community we get to be because we're so, not necessarily because we're so small, but kind of because we're so small.
well, I certainly don't want to feel like I'm on any particular pedestal, but yeah, there is something amazing about being able to find a project that sets off a spark for you and then being able to go, "Oh, this person has like here's a way to connect with them," and you can just reach out and they will tell you about the project they're working on. And they'll be excited about it.
Yeah, your heroes are probably real people made from flesh and blood and bones. And well, on the internet, that can be a little hard to verify, but they can talk to you even if they aren't.
I know with so many other things, it can feel like it's a little far off or it's a bit abstract, but there is something I find distinctly human about Cube, and it's really encouraging to hear you reference that.
For sure. Cube threads such as Deinonychus's, I've heard so many people pronounce it wrongly that I don't remember what the correct pronunciation is. I think it's something like Bodleian, but sorry, Deinonychus. But your thread is such a like it is a cube that I looked up to for a very long time, and then to be in that thread, and even if what I say in there isn't like really at all influential, it still is so unique to just be there right where the magic happens.
Well, I certainly wouldn't downplay your contributions. You never know which little kernel of an idea is going to is going to keep somebody up at night churning on some new development.
I would be incredibly honored if Deinonychus ever considered anything I had to say.
That's part of the fun of all these being potential together projects, things we get to work on as one.
For sure.
Well, there have been several great things that we've already explored, but if we tried to put a bit of a fine point on it, what advice would you think to share with other designers as they're engaged with their own projects along the way, whether alone or with others?
Whether it is meeting your heroes or whether it is designing for your playgroup, Cube is an incredibly social endeavor, and scouring over your Cube Cobra page won't help you move towards whatever it is you want to achieve. It's only in connecting with the people that are going to play your cube or willing to talk to you about your cube that you can get to wherever it is that you want to be. As addicting as it can be to look at a spreadsheet for hours.
Some of us are avoiding eye contact right now.
I have been there at hours like these.
Well, as we think of the hour here, I do want to make sure, J.Mul, that we get to engage with my favorite question here, which is, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
So I'm going to do a little bit of cheating and choose an artist that has done some work for Magic the Gathering before, but only in a secret lair, as far as I know. Namely, Junji Ito,
Yeah.
who has done a secret lair with a couple of cards, notably a Thoughtseize that ranks among my favorite card arts of all time. So that would be the quote unquote magic artist that I would choose for this. And if I don't take into account that there is already an art that I like for Atraxa Grand Unifier, then that would be my pick because that is probably my favorite card to resolve.
Oh, yeah.
If I do take that into account, then I would pick Rada Heart of Kelb, which is my fiance's favorite magic card,
Hey, that's a very thoughtful way to do it, a promo for somebody else.
especially for someone who means as much to me as my fiance.
I like that a lot. Well, and Junji Ito, of course, known for some truly terrifying artwork. The thought season question is pretty
Uh,
harrowing.
yeah, I think it probably fits Atraxa a little better than Rada, but there is already an excellent piece for that Atraxa. So taking that into account, I think I can throw my wife a very large bone.
That's perfect. Well, Jay Mule, thank you so much for taking the time, as you said at this hour, to just spend these moments. It's really been a joy for me to share about your cube, a bit about your thesis, and just about how you engage with the game. This has really been a treat for me. If folks want to follow up with you or learn more about your projects, where's the best place for them to go?
Probably just on Discord. My name there is J.Mul, as you have been calling me. My profile picture is a bunch of pasta with some cutlery in it.
Yeah,
It's unmistakably me. No one else can have it because it's a picture I took. So yeah, that would probably be the best place to find me.
perfect. Well, I'm again so grateful to you for your time. Just what a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.